Hello, everybody, boys and girls, ladies, gentlemen, and of course, anybody transgender who's watching. We don't wish to exclude anyone. We're not going to do that. So, welcome to all and sundry, near and far, F Christmas in particular. And you can go and look that one up. Spike knows what it is. It's me, Jon. Yes, hello, everybody. It's me, Jon, and Spike. Spike, who pulled a face at me when I called her my glamorous assistant when we were at Toronto. It's like it's what all magicians say, my glamorous assistant. So
Oh,
Spike's
but
my glamorous assistant.
I've never felt glamorous. I mean, okay.
Well, now's your chance. Now's your chance. You've got penguins behind you. What more could you need? The glamour of penguins, the allure of the Arctic. Unless, of course, it's the emperor
Antarctic here.
penguins.
Antarctic.
Or the Cape. You know, the Cape has those
On the
cute
Cape,
little
yes, those cute
penguins
little
too.
ones.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which I've seen. I saw them in Cape Town Aquarium. See, I've travelled. I have been to
Yes.
aquaria in various parts of the awning of the cage of aquariums.
Yes. Well,
Yeah, and you've asked me to pull faces so that we can
I've
have
asked you to
thumbnails.
pull
So
faces. Well, the thing is, I have been thinking about various movies and television shows that portray cults and how they portray them.
mm.
Or as I prefer high control groups, you prefer authoritarian groups. I
You
just,
say either, I say either.
yeah. The thing is, when Hollywood thinks of it, they do, and I'm gonna say it, murderous, sex-crazed Satanists in silly robes. And I
That's what we should call them. Let's stop calling it Scientology. We'll call them murderous, sex crazed.
Satanists in silly robes. Well, do they? They don't wear silly robes.
Mm.
They wear sailor
Yeah.
suits, or some of them do.
It reminds me of the heebie-jeebies. Do you ever hear the heebie-jeebies?
Mm.
The heebie-jeebies were one of the first tribute bands, but they weren't really a tribute band. And they did this great song. It went, meaningless songs in very high voices. See? Still do it.
Okay.
See,
Okay.
there's the clip for social media right there. The heebie-jeebies, everybody.
I won't even ask. However, I mean, then I went through and I
You
just
will.
basically went through, went, went and searched and found from 1934 something called the Black Cat, which does have, in fact, murderous, sex crazed. I made a list and actually I might even link
Mm,
it
mm.
where I actually checked off the boxes. Are they murderous? Check. Sex crazed? Yes. Are they Satanists? Yes. And are they wearing damn silly robes? And yes, they are wearing damn silly robes.
Yeah,
And
why don't people wear sensible robes anymore?
well, the thing is that so many of them, and why are there so many movies about cults that are these things that are strictly in the horror genre? I even went to Midsummer. I didn't watch it yet. However, I did pull up the Wikipedia page, read the plot synopsis, went through it.
Somebody gets killed every week in the village of Midsummer. Oh,
No, not Midsummer Murders.
damn.
Midsummer, the film,
Mm.
and they're not Satanists. There's Satanists, then there's vaguely earth centered, and then sometimes there's overly Christian, but it's usually Satanists or some kind of earth centered religion, which as a former neo-pagan I highly resent. Um, and they're murderous and there's a lot of sex because sex sells, but they're always firmly stuck in the horror genre, and they very rarely show, just like the documentaries don't, they very rarely show how these people get in. They're just these people wearing robes. In
Or
one
why
case,
on earth they'd keep doing it. You know, though you did
yeah,
say there's a lot of sex, and obviously that might be a reason.
there
But
might be, but then there's also the one that I said before we started recording, The Devil's Reign, which has William Shatner and John Travolta and Satanist,
Oh,
famous real life Satanist Anton LaVey,
mm.
and also Ernest Borgnine and a
Oh,
few other
excellent. Yeah.
notables.
Yeah.
And these people actually have had their faces removed and their eyes stitched shut. And no, I haven't watched it yet, but I watched enough of the previews and read this. Once again, I was reading synopses of all of these and going, wait a minute. They're all basically somebody's missing. We have to go rescue our daughter, our wife, our cousin, our roommate,
Mm,
whatever, from this evil group
mm.
rather than a bunch of people who have gotten together and may or may not be following an authoritarian group. My favorite is one that I actually have watched many times. It's one of Betty Davis's last movies, although not her absolute last movie, and it's called The Dark Secret of Harvest Home. And if you want sex crazed,
We
uh,
all want sex crazed.
well, yeah, if you want sex crazed, earth centered, worshippers, murderous, wearing silly robes. Once again, they go into an isolated neighborhood of people who follow the old ways and don't want to do modern farming. And they do a whole thing where, yes, it was sort of supposedly a thing in neopaganism, though I've seen a lot of the traditions that we say have been handed down have actually only been around since, 1928.
Well, Gardner in the
Yes.
1950s for much of Wicca, and I actually this week, um, because of what I'm working on, I picked up Robert Graves' White Goddess, and was a huge fan of Robert Graves in my 20s. I read lots of his novels. I read dipped into the Gospel of the Nazarene Restored. I read King Jesus, but I read all of his collected poems, all sorts of stuff. Starting, in fact, as a teenager with Goodbye to All That, his account of his time as a front line infantry captain in World War One, which he didn't seem to enjoy very much. But in looking at the White Goddess, I hadn't really realised, because when I went and looked something up on Wikipedia, it was kind of going, that quite a lot of neo-pagans are upset with criticism of the White Goddess. You're not meant to criticise the White Goddess. Now, the problem is, from a scholarly point of view, there are errors in it. Sorry, it's just that way. And Graves admits this. Graves says this will be the case because he used the process of analepsis or the process of prolepsis. They were the words I was looking for. Basically, looking back into the past or forward into the future and using your intuition to determine something. And he says the book is written based upon intuition. And elsewhere, he actually says, well, this has poetic virtue. It is not a way towards truth. We should actually check against evidence. Graves was a smart bloke. So finding that there are people who regard this as scripture rather than a penetrating and remarkable intellectual inquiry, we easily get into that.
Yeah. I mean, and the thing is that with all due respect to these folks, celebrating the seasons and doing all of this happy stuff, and there's so much misinformation. You grab your average book on tarot and it's going to tell you it goes back to Atlantis and the mists of time. It's
It
like,
does, yeah.
yeah. What I've been able to find is that actually back in Middle Ages there was something called a Trump parade where they'd have these.
We've got one of those now, haven't we?
Oy vey, not even gonna go there. Any case, where they do these kind of floats walking through town where here's the fool and all the little lessons you can learn from the fool, and then here's the magician, and so that it has all of these little mini morality plays being walked through
Yeah,
town.
the
And
miracle
then
plays, the Chester
yeah,
plays. Yeah.
yeah.
And I mean, I grew up in a town that still had a Bower, which was an annual festival, which is supposed to date back to the Middle Ages, where we'd throw money at people on floats for some reason.
Oh, we still do that in New Orleans, only beads and coins that are
Hmm.
made out of plastic.
Oh, yeah.
But then there was a card game that was kind of like a trick-taking game. You know, oh, I have three hearts, I get to take your fourth
Mm.
heart. I forget how the rules were, but it was basically it worked like primitive bridge or rummy.
Or
And
whist.
I never played whist. I always had,
Bridge is, I believe, derivative of whist.
you
So
see.
it's the same sort of form you have trumps.
So in any case, that's as far as I can tell. And I still keep my tarot decks around. And I always think they work not because of any mysterious power, but because what you do is we are predictive machines. You lay down the cards and there's meanings, cultural meanings to the cards, things like sadness, hope, joy, love, failure, yada, 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 and you make up a story for yourself on them. And it doesn't matter which cards come up. It doesn't matter what order they come up. It just matters the story that you're going to tell is probably going to give you a good idea of what's going on inside you, because like, that my best way of working out an idea is calling up a friend and talking at them about it.
Mm.
Well, this is another way of doing that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, with certain caveats that the problem is that if people don't understand that it's as random as the interpretation of dreams, and there are still people who believe in that, that there are conclusions that can be drawn
Mhm.
and the predictions can be dangerously wrong. I,
Yeah.
Something that relates to Scientology. Among my good friends was the late Elizabeth Tilden and Betty. She was a psychiatrist. She was the only psychiatrist in this country, the United Kingdom, who seemed to give a damn about people being in cults, which is unbelievable. And she had developed certain expertise. She spent many years. She was harassed by Scientology horribly, as people tend to be. And there was a case that I'm going to relate to tarot because, well, and I'll explain why when we come to it. I was talking with her one day about the Oxford Capacity Analysis personality test. Now, this is a personality test that was stolen by Mary Sue Hubbard from a reputable psychological source, though we don't have anything to do with the psychs in Scientology,
Oh, no.
and rewritten without permission or copyright. And she then gave it to a guy called Ray Kemp, who may have been to Oxford once. Who knows? I mean, he may have worked in the car plant there, Morris. But I don't. He certainly didn't go to the university. He was a merchant seaman. He rewrote the personality test, and that became the Oxford Capacity Analysis. So the case that Betty had been called in on a few years before was that a young girl had been found dead of suicide, with a copy of the Oxford Capacity Personality Test evaluation by her bedside. And the reality is, you know this story, but I'm presuming that there might be several people who are watching this who don't. When I first got into Scientology, long, long time ago, I was given a free personality test. Now, let's just make this really clear. There's no such thing as a free personality test. You get to pay sooner or later. And the the test was evaluated. So this is right at the very beginning. I've not done any courses. I've read the first book of Science of Survival that's cut in half. There are two books, supposedly. I I was grinding my way through Dianetics, the mental science of modern health. And I had my personality test, and the wonderful Linda Harrington, who evaluated it for me. And if anybody knows where Linda is, she became Linda Jones. I would love to talk with Linda again. She was great. Really, really loved her. But as you know, as I got to know her over the years. But there she is, and she says, "I'm not going to mark you down." And it was 10 years before I understood, when I finally got my hands on the handbook for the evaluator, that anything that scores above the central line, which in Scientology speak is called death, anything that scores above that line is inverted, because until you've done Scientology, you are dead. Who knew? You are
Lovely.
dead in the head. You are a raw meat wog, dead in the head person.
Mhm.
And so you can't possibly be above the death line, which is the central line on this thing. Now, I ran it, I've still got it somewhere, 80 to 90% positively, according to their test. It's a shame it's a bullshit test because I was in fantastic shape according to that, you know. And she said, I'm not going to mark you down. And she gave me the test as it was. So when years later I heard Betty say this girl had killed herself, I went,
She was
yeah.
marked down to make her think that she was, yes.
Yeah, and she believed that she was beyond saving. That won't be. In fact, probably what they said in Scientology was, "We can save you. Just give us £100,000 and you'll be fine." So taking things which are to be, where the evaluation is made up by the person doing it, doesn't seem a very reliable thing to me. Let me
Yeah.
tell you another story. You like stories, right? I was 14 and my girlfriend said, "Oh, Village Fete, Aurewas. Could you come and read fortunes?" So I went, yeah, sure. And so I went to the village fete and put a towel on my head or whatever. I didn't put a towel on my head. That's another bizarre reference to L. Ron Hubbard and his time in Hollywood, where he said he went out and hypnotized people having put a towel on his head for some reason we'll never understand. I just sat with an ordinary deck of cards and figured out I didn't read anything about what I was meant to be doing and just did it.
Mhm.
And a week later, this woman came up to me and said, "That was incredible. You were exactly right."
I used to do all sorts of, where I just basically lay down the cards. One woman got so angry at me, she told me, "You have no idea." But it was obviously I touched a nerve by something
Mm,
because it's like, okay, if I didn't know
yeah,
anything, why
yeah.
are you
Mm.
reacting with such anger?
Methinks the lady doth protest too much.
Yeah. But after I got out of it, I realized that I can evaluate for me watching the stories that I'm telling myself, but I have no business telling anybody else what those stories mean to them. That's just not kosher and not on anymore. And I very rarely use them anyway. And also, there's so much misunderstanding about that too, because so many people they appear in horror stories too. I watched an indie horror story where a vampire was giving somebody a tarot reading and she just kept on flipping over multiple death cards. And if you know anything about tarot, death doesn't mean death, it means change, yada, yada, yada. But
Yeah.
get back to the horror stories, they're always viewed as these horrible people that are predatory, that are after you. And yes, there are groups that are predatory, like Scientology, but they're not this, and there's always some kind of
They
super.
don't usually do cosplay, is what you're trying to say,
They don't
right?
usually do cosplay,
Unless it's dressing up in navy
and
uniform,
the
of course.
people in them are usually people who have been taken advantage of, who are altruistic. And once again, very few of these movies, just like very few of the documentaries, talk about how did these people get in? Why did they get in? How did they get? However, there are a few exceptions. There's The Path, which once again I haven't seen, but I spent all last
I,
night.
I have, in fact, seen The Path, all of it.
And you want to tell us about how
It's what's his,
accurate
it's
it is?
what's his, it's Jesse Pinkman, isn't it? Aaron Paul,
Yeah.
who's a Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul fame. I think Breaking Bad is awful. I think Better Call Saul is awful. They really, you know, um, brilliant drama, but melting people in the bathtub. I mean, come on, kids.
Oh,
There should be
all of
some
this
limits. And
prepackaged violence. I've never understood it. But The
yeah,
Path.
and lots of it. But so Aaron Paul, was Jesse Pinkman in that, and he's a central character in The Path.
Mhm.
And it the idea is he's fundamentally that their founder has had this incredible experience where he's climbed up a ladder of fire into heaven, and there are people who were with him and saw it and all this. And what's happening is that the leader is no longer there, and there's the question of whether he's alive or dead at the beginning. And the followers are now reassessing their membership, and you see people go through a variety of the kind of questioning that you do go through.
Mhm.
So it of course falls within the Leon Festinger's guidelines in When Prophecy Fails, and his concept of cognitive dissonance, that those who believe intensely, who believe fervently, as Yuval Laor would perhaps have it, those who believe fervently will stay, and as in Heaven's Gate, they cut their testicles off and kill themselves. It's not healthy, children. Don't try that at home. And they're not the first cult of bloody castrati either. The crises of conscience, the crises of belief are fairly well represented, but you are still looking at a group that's seen as strange, as bizarre. And, you know, this should be a separate topic, so we'll probably come back to it. I have been researching. I love the way people use that word when they've got Wikipedia, I've researched it. I've looked at the Wikipedia page on it. It's like, yeah, really. I've been reading books. Remember books?
Or Facebook or Reddit or I've been doing
Books.
research in my
These
Facebook.
things here, like this cheerful character here. Look at that. That's research. I can barely pick the bloody thing up.
The little tabs in it too. Very, very impressive.
Oh, and everything very carefully annotated because it's kind of important. But when Margaret Singer called the book that she and Jan Jelicek published called Cults in Our Midst, when she called it that, it does say in the book itself, but Margaret told me that she was working on it when I met her in '93. They were finishing it off. And she said it's because our society is a set of interconnected cults. There's nothing else.
Yeah.
And it's all a matter of how extreme it is or isn't. So what we should do if we ever finish talking about movies, and we may not, we may go to the end of time doing this, then we should talk a little bit about Freemasons and Rosicrucians and the influence of cults in our society. But we're not going to do that now.
No, but I did want to stick in that people are also searching for answers, to the point where while I was reading through the wiki page, and I actually did check the source, the primary source that they were quoting from, which was a Rolling Stone article about when
You're suggesting that a Rolling Stone article was a primary source. There's an interesting thought.
They did an interview with one of the people who was filming it.
Fair enough. That's fair enough. I'll admit that then.
And they were filming, and they'd taken this bookstore over to make it a front for the fake group, the path, I think it is, or no, what were they called again? Doesn't matter. I'll put
Apological. Got systemites in the path. That's my favorite word from it. The systemites.
Any case, they made up these little flags with the eyeball with the little dots around it and everything. And they had people walking into the store while they were preparing for filming, asking if they could join. Because
that's the very beginning of our channel, when Sam and I sat down, and Sam talked about the Church of Saminanity, and it was Samananity when he first, and I said, no, Sam-inanity, that's the way to go with it. He was 14, he was at school, and he asked his friends if they wanted to join this thing, and they said yes. And they had to do something on film that would make them look ridiculous. That was part of the membership. People readily did this. And then he put forward, of course, the brilliant series of commandments that you had to accept. He's really 14 years old, such a smart boy. And then he got two teachers to join.
Now, the thing about do with
What is going on? It's
something
like, oh yeah,
film.
can I join that? That looks wacky. I'd love to do that. Do they suspend me in a wicker basket and set me on fire? Because I really like the look of that.
No, not the bees.
Not the bee.
Sorry.
Oh.
But then that's very like the idea of doing something on film that makes you look ridiculous is very like the real life,
Which I would never do, by the way.
very
I've
like
made
the
nearly
real group.
530 ridiculous films so far, but
Very like the real group of Nixium, where they had to write
slashers.
some. Well, they also had to write something that would make
Yeah,
that
what do they call that? The
collateral.
collateral. Isn't it just unbelievable? Yeah.
And also, I noticed in the path, I noticed that they used their little confessionals, the tape confessional program,
Exploration moments
yeah,
or something. Is that what they're called?
as blackmail.
Yeah, absolutely. Why
And
not?
also, they practiced disconnection as well. So there were a lot of.
Very popular.
Now, the one thing I want to say is that, yeah, the movies seem to be extremely inaccurate and just based on horror porn,
Hmm.
trauma porn. Let's get this girl in a negligee on a slab, or like
Sounds good to me.
or the or young Sherlock Holmes, or Temple of Doom,
Hmm.
where you've got, somebody for the hero to chase and a bunch of minions that can be killed off in a fancy way. But I found that there were a lot of TV shows that had cult related episodes.
Hmm.
Most notably King of the Hill, Fun with Jane and Jane, where one of the characters, Luann, gets briefly into a cult, and they actually show the love bombing that happens. I mean, it's accelerated because it's a half-hour cartoon, for gosh sakes, but they show the low protein diet. They show the now you must change your name to Jane.
Hmm. Re-identification, yeah.
They show a lot of the, and then also the how do you get somebody else out by acting kind and whatever. That's also repeated in
I don't
other,
know why I bother actually. Just everybody forget watching this. Go and watch King of the Hill.
and
And
then
it will
there's The Simpsons,
yeah.
where they do
When
two
Nancy
episodes.
Cartwright is drawn into an evil cult, and there's Handmaid's Tale where
The
Elizabeth Moss is
movement.
drawn into it. It just seems to affect a lot of Scientologists, this one way or
Well,
another.
the thing
Then
is,
there's
that
the
Scientology,
chef in South Park who's
yeah.
drawn into a Scientology cult, and it's
Well, so
weird.
I mean, going back to The Simpsons, they get in early on into movementarianism, which is loosely based on Scientology.
The Church of Chemicalology and Rex the Runt.
Mm.
There's the best of all of them. That is the most brilliant of all of
Oh,
them.
I'll have to add that to the
Johnny
list.
Savaloy, the 100-year-old meat product, processed meat product. And that's got Stanley Unwin in it too, the
But
professor,
the thing I
where he
wanted to
was about 100 by the time he did that. So that, get it, Rex the Runt. Don't waste your time watching me. What's Rex the Runt? That's actually funny.
Anywho, but in the movementariums in The Simpsons, they actually also have how do they get Lisa involved? They
Mhm.
give her good grades. How do they get Bart involved? By letting him do whatever he wants. How do they get Homer involved? No, 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 leader. But they
Donuts.
also they're
Donuts.
they're all in this auditorium watching the indoctrination film, and somebody gets up to leave, spotlight comes down. You're free to leave, of course, but we just want to know why. Oh, never mind, I'll just sit here. Because nobody
Stuart Lee gets the whole audience to applaud if somebody leaves because he thinks it's very brave of somebody to be willing to
exactly.
show themselves up in
Because
this
your
way.
average person, we've been taught, particularly if you're female, don't make trouble, don't rock the boat.
You were taught that? I don't remember anybody teaching me that. I missed
Well, I
that
was
lesson.
and 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 I you know that one of my favorite ways of relaxing is watching Reddit stories with family drama. And all the time there's somebody in the family who's an absolute jerk. and go and teases people, verbally abuses people, even sometimes physically abuses people. And the person who's being abused is always told, "No, that's just how he is. Don't rock the boat. Don't make a fuss. You're overreacting. It's just a joke." So that's always the person who's saying, "Hey, that's not right," who's being told not not to be make trouble. What?
I'll again give you a little adage about that, that I
Please
was
do.
contacted, 30 years or so back by a woman who was somewhat distraught. And she had a master's degree. She was a Jungian therapist and can't be helped. And speaking of
You're only
cults,
young once.
yes, and he thankfully is no longer. But whichever, I will have vitriol and bile to pour on Carl Gustav Jung at a later date.
At a
But
later.
anyway, she called me up and she was upset, distraught, because she just been to a course that day of reevaluation co-counseling.
Yeah.
And she said, she put her hand up and said, excuse me, this sounds enormously like L. Ron Hubbard's Dianetics. And everybody in the room just wanted her to shut up.
Mm-hmm.
So she called me and I said, well, yes, it is L. Ron Hubbard's Dianetics. Harvey Jackins, who started it and has denied any connection with Ron Hubbard or anything, I can send you a photo of him shaking hands as he takes his certificate from Hubbard. That's how, and at this time, the Open University, the largest university in the world, and fairly well run, they for years had been using reevaluation co-counseling and just doling it out to their students. And when I went to them and said, look, you really ought to look into this, because they dismissed me, which I'm quite used to, of course. And a couple of years later, when Jackins was charged with various sexual abuse crimes, they dropped it for some reason. They'd obviously investigated it and found that it was dangerous. It must have been that. It wasn't because of Jackins and the scandal.
Anywho, one of the reasons that I got into this also,
Moving on swiftly.
that please, 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 in the comments, leave your favorite cult-related movie or TV
Mm.
show, is because one of my things that I like to do is try to teach about cults through popular culture.
Of course, it's the way that you get something over. I wrote novels in the hope that this would, and then publishers
Exactly.
wouldn't go near them. This isn't an airport thriller. I got back from one of them. It's like, I knew it wasn't an airport thriller.
And but so many of them, the ones, or at least the early ones, don't even try. However, there are a couple ones, and they're the ones that are loosely based on real ones, like The Master or The Sacrament, which is based on the Jonestown tragedy. And I have not, once again, I have not seen The Master, but I have heard that it is, and once again, read the. I do have a list of these that I am going to watch one day, get myself a giant bowl of popcorn. But I tried watching it once, and once they got to the guy sculpting a naked woman in the sand and enjoying himself with her, it was like,
Pleasuring himself. And
yeah,
you really don't want to try that, kids. Again,
friendships
the
everywhere.
sand goes everywhere. Don't do it. Don't even
But
try it.
could you speak to how close the master is to the real?
Yeah, not very.
Not
Um,
very. Okay, good.
so you've got two of the greatest actors of the generation,
Mm.
Philip Seymour Hoffman,
Oh, rest in
whack,
peace. We'll see.
Joaquin Phoenix, just incredible. Um, I I think they were in touch with me while they were making it. There were a couple of people making movies who contacted me for some kind of comment, and I got the impression that this was still during the point where Scientology was very frightening,
Mm.
and you did not mess with them because they would mess with you.
Mhm.
And when I had 11 publishers say they'd like to publish Piece of Blue Sky, the book formerly known as A Piece of Blue Sky, let's sell these people a piece of blue sky. 11 publishers who wanted to do it and said, but there's no money in it because
Mhm.
they'll sue you.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and that's a good reason not to do things, I think. It's
And it,
good reason not to protest and make
oh
a
yeah,
fuss about things because you might get in a bit of trouble for it. But so with the master, there was still this concern, and I got the idea that there were daily rewrites going on while they were filming to take out the obvious, which is that the central character is Ron Hubbard,
yeah,
um, and it meant that it's a story based upon it is
yeah.
not accurate, and now of course you could do it. You
Oh
know,
yeah.
when Paul Haggis made his retreat from Scientology, I wrote to him and said I was a fan of his work. You know, his version of Crash, particularly, is a great film. But his other Oscar was for Million Dollar Baby, which he wrote the script for, which is a good film. So I wrote to him and said I was a fan, and he wrote back and said, "Oh, I'm a fan of yours," which was quite nice. It's like, okay, that's fun. And I said, "Look, great, let's movie about Ron Hubbard using Billy Liar as one of the bases. You can go out and find the wonderful. I think it was Tom Courtenay who played it in the great British film of it, and it's Keith Waterhouse, I think, wrote it. And you've basically got this fabulist who lives in his own head, and in the movie, you see him acting out these things as if he'd done them, and then you get back to, oh, it didn't really happen, which is a device that was in the 60s. It's a device that's been used many times since, that we see the dream and then realize the person is dreaming. And so I said, well, with Ron Hubbard, we could do this thing where we have the story he tells, and then we see what actually happened. And Paul Haggis said no.
Oh well.
Then he got into trouble with these various allegations being made against him. And
Yeah.
I like to think that the two things are not in any way connected. But if only we'd made that film showing what an absolute idiot Ron Hubbard is, or was,
Yeah.
think how the world would have changed, But South Park came along and we don't have to
There
worry about that
was
anymore.
one called The Prophet that I watched once, and I think it was spelled Profit. But it
Profit.
was actually once again, very loosely based on Scientology. I think it was done by somebody, the billionaire who did the Lisa McPherson Fund before he got
Well, he was a multimillionaire,
multi.
and by the time he'd finished, he wasn't.
Oh,
Yeah, Stacey married him, Bob
yeah.
Minton.
Bob
Bob
Minton.
Minton.
I think he
Mm,
was, but I'd have to look up again. It wasn't a very good film.
mm.
But it did include the incident where Ron Hubbard steals the yacht from his friend
Well, where he steals the money and buys yachts.
and buys yachts.
Yeah,
Yes.
Jack
Yes.
Parsons,
So,
the I broke up black magic in
so they
America. I
actually
stole his money.
had actual magic occurring. And that's one of the other things about a lot of these movies is there is an actual devil
Oh
and
yeah, he sent a
divine
squall. He sent a squall. That
Mhm.
was the word that Jack Parsons used. He sent a squall.
Doesn't the path actually have people are having prophetic dreams? Because
Well,
I like she,
they take ayahuasca,
yeah,
and I
but
think
that
you do by the end realize that these were experiences.
well, it looked like a lot of the time what they were seeing on the ayahuasca
Mm.
was actually accurate, which is probably not the case
Well, I'm told
in
by the
life.
people I've talked to taken ayahuasca that they don't see things that are accurate.
Yeah,
And
yes.
first time, a friend of mine, 20 years ago, came and said, "Oh, I've taken ayahuasca and it's fantastic. Angels come and talk to you." And I was like, "Not for me then.
Yeah, yeah.
Don't want to talk to angels. I've had enough of them.
Oh, no.
Always bloody coming round here. Bloody angels. Get
So
your own show. Leave me alone."
what I'd like to see though more is more movies actually doing the actual how did you get involved. One of them, which actually is accurate, but on the other end, is Marcy, Martha, May, Marlene. I might have gotten some of those mixed up.
M's wrong. No.
And that is the aftermath. this woman joins a small group and they accelerate her getting into this guy who basically there's a couple of other guys, but they're mostly females and he sleeps with all of them, and that's the whole point. And they also do robberies, and one robbery, spoiler alert, somebody dies. She gets very upset and leaves to go with her sister, and then the rest of the movie, the most of the movie is her with her sister and her sister's husband being totally wrecked as a human being, totally non-functional, and her family having to deal with that. And then you see the story in flashbacks, and that shows pretty realistically, I think, how absolutely wrecked you can get. And unfortunately, the cluelessness of the family as they go, well, you just got to behave. Let it go. It happened. It's over now. Sorry, trauma doesn't work that way, sweethearts.
Mm.
Um, Other ones that I have seen that have actually worked are surprisingly in TV shows. As you know, I'm a fan of Ghosts, both the UK and the US versions. And both of them have episodes where the husband of the couple that owns the haunted house, for those who don't know, Ghosts is about a young couple
You
who
have a haunted house.
inherit a haunted house and are trying to
How did
run
I know that?
a bed and breakfast,
Mm.
and hilarity ensues, yada yada. But each of them have a separate episode. One of them is kind of, once again, it's accelerated, where Jay in the US version, the husband, meets a bunch of people playing basketball and they have this health patch. And then they move into the mansion and take over his life. And he realizes, oh, hell no, this is a cult. And there was a hippie ghost who was in a cult and a commune. Explains, well, in the commune we could wear shoes and call our friends.
I
Or
think that's an important distinction, that in
yeah,
cults you cannot wear shoes.
and you
Mm.
can and you can't. Well, it was actually you can't call your family in the cult. You can call your family in the
Mm.
commune.
Mm.
But but it's the way they break up the cult or try to or get them out of their hair is that the one woman pretends to have slept with the leader and that breaks them all up, which is not that's not how things work. Now,
Not
the other
usually.
one, the UK, I was very impressed. First of all, though, they go right off and explain all the kooky stuff. And oh, you wear a golden sash and you're going to be dunked in the water and find your true purpose. And they show all the kooky stuff right up front, which, as we all know, is not how cults work again. But how the wife gets rid of them is so clever and would actually work. She pretends to be crazy by starting to talk to the ghosts that she can see and nobody else can right in front of them. And they go, oh, we don't want her because she's crazy. Because what most people who haven't been in our field don't realize is cult recruiters don't go after crazy people. They're the last person that they want.
No,
Is
they don't want weak people. They don't want poor people. They don't want inadequate people. One would have thought that the dependent personality disorder would be more highly represented in cults than elsewhere. I don't think it is. It is
no,
more highly represented among suicide bombers, but
yeah,
that's a quite different
that's a
subject.
totally different subject. But I
Mm.
thought that was a brilliant freaking way
Mm.
to get rid of cult recruiters is
Mm.
simply pretend to be insane and they'll leave skid marks.
It is said that it was also a way that was used by pioneers who were crossing the plains, that if they met the Cheyenne or the Lakota, that if you acted crazy, they'd leave you alone because from their perception, you might be a religious person, you might be possessed of a spirit, and so it was best to leave you alone.
Oh,
But not all of the pioneers were sensible enough to do this, and so some of them got into a bit of trouble
well,
along the way.
yeah. Well, when you've got a bunch of invaders coming across your country and taking over your land bit by bit by bit, people do tend to get upset by that.
Mm, yeah, I mean, I spent I wrote a play about the Ponca people who lived between the Cheyenne and the Lakota. I got very interested in that. And there's a great book called Buckskin and Blanket Days, written
Mm,
by a journalist who actually was the guy who got the Ponca a lawyer and had them released because the US government had no reason to detain them. We don't know how that's going to be going forward, but they were released under a writ of habeas corpus. They had committed no crime. So it's interesting seeing that culture, the Plains culture, that there were Europeans who interacted in a perfectly healthy way. Not so much with the Lakota. I mean, if you look to Black Elk, you find somebody who had never seen somebody with white skin.
mhm.
And you see in his generation that, as you say, that terrible invasion of the land to which they belonged, not the land that belonged to
Yeah,
them, because that wouldn't have been their perception.
yeah.
Just it's a dreadful period. But I won't
No, no,
persist with that. I could sit and complain about that for
that's an
hours.
entirely different conversation,
Yeah, or several.
but it's interesting to me though, and I think I've said this already, that the more accurate interpretations of how cults work seem to be in comedy TV shows in a one-off episode, or in the case of soap, a five-episode arc.
Or the Kaminsky method.
Oh, see, I had totally left that off my list. I should probably look
Well,
at that. And
Well,
then
yeah,
there's
it's got
also
a
the ones where,
Scientologist in it. It's got
yeah,
a
where,
Scientologist as a character running through several episodes, and berates them. And I think it's become commonplace to say something about Scientology in the
mhm,
last 20 years. In any comedy you're doing, you will have at some point to mention that. I think Erica Young in Fear of Flying in the 70s made a precedent by saying that she could either commit suicide or join Scientology. That's how depressing her life was.
and
But
there are these ones that are actually, there's one that's about a ballet school, the name of which escapes me for the moment, and all the mental horribleness that's going on in this very tight-knit music school. And as somebody who has been in music school, yeah, it gets like that.
yeah, it happens. I mean, in terms of seeing how, the steps by which it occurs, The Vow has, a lot of footage, but it's not sorted in that way.
Mhm.
Extraordinarily well done, and I must ask Mark Vicent
Stolen
to
Youth is
come on the show again.
yes, Stolen Youth is
That
great.
was what I was going to say. Stolen Youth shows you, because it's recorded from the first moment that the con artist approaches them, and you see how he wins them over. And you're not dealing with just love bombing, which is an easy and early stage. He is actually addressing the problems they have, which are the problems that 18 and
Yeah,
19-year-olds do have, and offers kind of parental advice that is reasonably good, and
of
therefore
course.
draws them in. And it doesn't, I felt, when I came away from it, and I haven't seen the add-on episode. There's a fourth episode where
Yes, and
Felicia
I
goes
haven't
through her
seen it
recovery,
either.
and I would like to see that. But you see just how quickly it happens when Felicia becomes involved. She is interning as a psychiatrist in Los Angeles, and he's got her before she even catches the plane to come and
Mhm.
see them. And what's not necessarily made utterly clear, and should be, is that there were people involved with this guy for 10 years. This wasn't just a weekend, that,
Yeah,
and you then see him torturing them,
yeah,
on film. You've got him, the guy on his tongue, and threatening them, and going further and further out. And you see the baby steps, the increments of dissonance
which
as
start
you
with
become
good
more involved.
advice. Start with good advice, start with care, because if it started with total bullcrap, nobody would join.
Probably not. I might actually, but
But
yeah,
seriously,
it's a problem that exists with groups. That the dynamics of groups. it's like the Lord of the Flies, that
Mhm.
there is in fact a real case of some kids who were stranded around that time. You, of course, before that got, in fact, I think it's the same year that Muzaffar Sharif puts out his study, which kind of supports the idea of Lord of the Flies, though unfortunately his study has a little problem with it. But we won't get into that here. But somewhere around about 1960, some kids did get dumped on an island, and they created a perfectly friendly community. So
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, there was also another case years later in the 80s where some kids got shipwrecked. They stole a boat. But since it was like seven of them, they were very, very caring of each other.
if it had been eight, oh, it wouldn't have
Well,
happened.
I do have a thing that, if you're under our, what is it, the monkey number called, where it's like 150
The
and above
the
that,
Dunbar number, named for Robin Dunbar,
I've always
and
felt that any system would work under that number.
well, Dunbar says you'll only have five close friends. That was his later work. So if you've got more than that, dump them. It's my recommendation because it's not possible. They
Ah,
don't really like you, you know.
I've got more than five close penguins.
Well,
Oh,
that'll do. That'll do. Yeah. So what else needs to be said on this topic?
I would like invite people once again to leave your favorite cult related movie and or TV episode or show because I really am going to do a whole thing on this
Hmm.
at a later date. This is just sort of a beginning of the exploration and why it worked, why it didn't work. Is it just a total there's one where the it's a British show and the American title is They're Coming to Get You.
It's true, they are.
Why do you think they're popular?
Hmm. And I mean, you've got, as you said, there's a crossover into horror,
Hmm.
and
They're all
looking
in
at
the horror genre. Most of them, like some 90% of them are in the horror genre.
yeah, and so you've got the Wicker Man, the
Mhm.
Midwich Cuckoos, John Wyndham,
Oh,
the great John
I
Wyndham.
did want to mention Hot Fuzz, the brilliant comedy, which actually deals with okay, they're murderous. They're not sex crazed. They're not Satanists. They're basically a homeowners association that's gone crazy. And they do have darn silly robes.
Yeah, see, there you
And,
go.
but
Homeowners
as a
associations.
historical note, the guy who plays the man watching on the member of the homeowners association that's on the cameras watching all the neighborhood is the same guy who is the lieutenant police officer who gets burned in the original Wicker Man. Same actor.
Um, Edward Woodward.
Yes.
Yeah,
But they have this chant where it's all for the common good.
cheers.
It could be the motto of every single cult that's in real time. In reality, they were not there for sacrificing and bringing Satan into the world. They're there because they want to change the world for the better,
We all want to
to
change
make
the world for the better,
or
and
make more money or learn something better about the Bible or yada 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 yada.
yeah, as Donald Trump has said, there are some good things about Hitler, and I can't think of any at the moment. But
Well,
um,
there was actually
unless you think vegetarianism is a good thing, or building the autobahn, or bringing in the first animal rights legislation, or saying that smoking causes lung cancer,
but also
co-designing the Volkswagen Beetle.
that these groups are very much like an abusive relationship, only there's more
Hmm.
people, duh. Because I was also listening to something on abusive relationships, and a woman who had been with somebody who was highly abusive, said it's like taking a bitter pill that's sugar coated, but the poison isn't in the bitter pill. The poison is in the sugar coating.
Mm. And so bear that in mind, everyone. The poison is in the sugar coating.
Well,
So
it is.
wash the sugar coating off and then swallow the pill.
Well, the sugar coating is that love that makes you stay around. That's
Saccharin.
why so many people stay in abusive relationships.
Well, yeah, that is a complex, a complex nest of ideas, and we recommend that people read Opening Our Minds because that's what we did to try and explore that crossover between abusive one-on-one relationships and abusive, where the folie à deux becomes a folie à plusieurs.
Hmm.
You have a group of people involved. Okay, should we wrap that up and
Yeah,
think about something else, maybe? So thank you so much for getting to the end of this video. You're one of 3 remaining subscribers. We've had a very bad time this year because we protested about certain things, and people have told me to stay in my lane.
which
And
means
my
I disagree with you.
yeah, and they're kind of saying, I'm going, I've spent 40 years studying authoritarians and the groups they form. This is my lane. And I will probably keep on saying annoying things to people. But of course, if you've got through to the end of this, then you're not one of those people who
And we love you.
decided that I don't know anything about anything.
And even if you disagree, as long as you disagree politely,
Agreeably.
yeah,
Yeah, it
because
could happen.
I mean,
You know,
John and I disagree about stuff all the time, but he's
I
still,
don't agree with that.
no, thank you very much. Anyhow,
Yes, thank you very much for watching, and please tell everybody about us. And we just love to get past that 10,000 subscriber point.
yeah,
We've been a few hundred below it for a year now, and I blame you for not recruiting your friends and your
send me to
aunts and
ethics,
cousins.
John.
No, not you, the people
Oh,
watching.
oh,
I
oh,
blame
oh.
all of you. Spike, of course, would take the blame on for you, so you don't have to worry about it. No, I don't blame you. You've done very well watching this far, and yeah, comments right about this. We want to have a conversation here. Then we won't have to make videos, so that'd be pretty good, wouldn't it? So I have been John Atack, and this has been Spike Robinson, and we wish you all the best. Thank you very much indeed. Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much. Meaningless songs in very high voices.